Today we will be talking about adolescence. So this is a cartoon picture. This is the anatomy of a teenager's brain. So let's go over this quickly. So if you notice, the biggest part of a teenager's brain is the birds and the bees lobe, right? Because that's all teenagers think about is sex. So you got all those hormones raging. That's what's on your mind all the time, right? Underneath that, you got the slang decoder, right? Because you guys kind of make up your own language, you know, making up words. Parents, teachers got no idea what you're talking about, and that's been the case for generations. Underneath that, you got this small little part of the brain. That's your judgment gland, right? He knows it's very small because teenagers don't tend to make the best judgments. And we learned that last unit how the brain develops from back to front, and the frontal lobe's the last part to develop, and that's where your judgment and decision making comes from. Notice next you got the memory for music. That one's pretty big because you guys seem to know the lyrics to every song possible. Can't quite remember the homework, but you can remember the lyrics to the songs. So I remember like when I was coaching football, coming back from a win, and the the players were singing like literally every song the entire way back, and I had a lot of them in class. I'm like, you guys can't remember anything on the homework or what we went over in class, but the lyrics you guys remember. That's why I always recommend for students to, you know, as to review, make up like a song. And so I've had a lot of students make up parodies for extra credit in the past, which is always an offer to you guys, and because people tend to memorize it better that way. And so the students who have done that in the past and make up songs as reviews, they tend to do better on that section. This other tiny section right here, barely see it. That's your memory for chores and homework and things like that. Like I just said, you always seem to forget to do your homework, do your chores, the dishes, take out trash. When we have a test, you're like, what? We have a test? I had no idea. Right? You don't seem to have a memory for that, but other things you got memories for. All right, so let's go up. We got the cool gauge, right? Because it's all about being cool. Even though a lot of students deny it now, but it really is. It's about wearing the right clothes, the fashion, hairstyles, whatever it might be. In the middle of the brain, you got the center of the universe, right? Because teenagers think they are the center of the universe, that everything revolves around them. Up top, you got the rebellion center, and then you got the super turbo rebellion center, because we know how teenagers like to rebel, and some of you guys really like to rebel. Up top here, we got the self-image, because, like I mentioned earlier, your self-image is important to you, whatever it might be. And it's not always the same thing or necessarily what's popular, but self-image is important to teenagers, as you're going to see in some vocab that we'll talk about later. And notice that this is prone to bruising. Underneath here, you got the fitting in gland. We all want to fit in. That's just part of human species, right? You always want to be part of a group. We're a social animal. And it doesn't necessarily mean the popular group, but it's some group that you always want to be part of. Underneath that, you have every episode of The Simpsons, and that could be whatever is popular now, whether it's Family Guy or some show off Netflix. But you tend to remember, every episode of that series that you love. Let's move over here for a second. You got the personality fluctuator. Same thing with the hormones raging. Your personality, you guys are moody. Right? It goes back and forth. One day you walk in, you're the sweetest person. The next day you walk in, and no one wants to be by you. Right? So you got the personality fluctuator. Underneath that, you got the love for parents and the disdain for parents. That's a yin-yang sign. So like every culture has some form of this. And this is that love-hate relationship you have, especially with your parents. Right? You love them, they're your parents, but at the same time you can't stand them because they tell you to do all these different things you don't want to do. Let's go back here to the indestructibility cortex. And that's where teenagers think they can do whatever they want and nothing's going to happen to them. Right? They can drive 100 miles an hour, they'll be fine. And that's just that kind of arrogance that goes with being a teenager. And, I've did a lot of stupid things when I was a teenager as well. Just glad to be alive right now. Underneath that, you have the slam the door reflex. Whenever you get mad, you just want to slam the door. Unfortunately, my kids have started that one early. Next to that, you have the car key craving. You guys always want the car keys. A lot of students now kind of deny that one a little bit, but I know when I was a teenager, always wanted a car. Let's go back up top for a second. We got the internet phone addictions. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to deny it now that most teenagers are obsessed with their phones and their internet, and that's because of social media, especially, and videos, right? You guys are always watching videos, playing a game, whatever it is. The obsession is there, and I would say nowadays that part of the brain needs to be even bigger. To the back of the brain, we got this tiny area. This is your peer pressure resistance, right? So teenagers don't usually resist peer pressure that much, right? You usually give into it. And as we talked about last unit, peer pressure isn't just, oh, do this, do this, do that, or whatever it might be. It's just when you think someone's watching you that, you kind of act differently. You act more reckless when you think people are watching you. Underneath that, this tiny part of the back of the brain as well is the ability to be seen in public with parents. Once again, teenagers say that's not the same anymore as it once used to be, but small section don't typically want to be seen in public with the parents, especially depending on our parents, I guess. And the last one is all the answers, right? Because teenagers think they know everything, right? No one can tell you anything because you know the answer already. Right? When parents, teachers, they try to tell you something, oh, we can't talk to you because you already know the answer. All right, so that's just a little bit about the teenage brain. I think it's kind of accurate. Let's move on to the adolescence. What is it? Well, adolescence is actually changing over time. Right now, adolescence begins earlier in life and ends later than it did in previous centuries. So think to yourself, why is that? All right, what can you come up with? There's a couple possibilities for that. One is that it's getting later because our culture has changed where we don't want to take responsibility now. Where back maybe a century ago, by 20 you were probably married, had kids, and had a career already. Now you need more education to get that better job, so more people are going to school, so that's prolonging it. And you're going to school longer. Even like a bachelor's degree, probably the average person takes at least 5 years to get it now. And then a lot of people, once they get even their bachelor's degree, they're not, they don't want to start the real world yet. So then, oh, let's just go get a master's, simply because they don't want to take on that responsibility. And so now you have mid-20s to 30-year-olds still living with their parents. So they haven't got to adulthood yet because, they're not taking on that responsibility. So that's one of the reasons you see adolescents moving farther down the line where it's older. And then earlier as well, because you see, especially young girls, where they're trying to act older at a younger age, putting on makeup, dressing, provocative, things like that, where you see a 10-year-old, you don't know if they're 10 or 16. So, this adolescence has expanded where, I've read many articles where they say it's roughly, about 10 to 24 now is what they say adolescence is. And who knows where we'll be in the future. Early maturation. All right, so girls and boys who mature earlier, girls are seen as sex objects. Boys are seen successful in social situations. Both tend to be treated older, right? Both are treated older. But remember, just because they look older doesn't mean they are older. So mentally, and emotionally, they're still that younger age. So just because they look older doesn't necessarily mean they should be treated older, even though they are. Late bloomers, girls and boys, tend to be jealous of people who've already developed. But once they do develop, they tend to have a better sense of self, right? Because they've seen what other people have gone through, and so they've kind of observed that, and so they tend to have a better sense of self. And so here's some examples from movies. If you've seen them, Molly Ringwald, if you remember her from the Rat Pack in the late 80s, she was like the 16 Candles. She was in like Breakfast Club. And then you have Leonardo DiCaprio. A lot of you guys probably know him nowadays, but he was a child star, definitely like a late bloomer. Even when he was in his 30s, when I looked at him, he looked like he had a baby face to me. So this is an old movie, Basketball Diaries, one of his older movies. So youth behavior trends. So this is something that we found out over the last, 2, 3 decades with ninth graders. So we're talking about 14 and 15-year-olds here. So the top, will start with the top, the green. Have they ever drank alcohol? Back in the early 90s, over 70% had, and that pretty much stayed the same for that entire decade. Then it started to drop, and it's below 50% now. Cigarettes, right? That was probably 2/3 almost had done it in the 90s, and then that significantly dropped to roughly 20%. And so as we're going through these, think about why have they dropped? Well, cigarettes is one. We're more educated on it now. We know how dangerous it is. It's not as popular now, especially since you can't smoke in enclosed areas like in buildings and restaurants anymore. And just the price has gone through the roof. So it's extremely expensive to smoke cigarettes. So it's a wonder why anyone still does it, which ironically, I tend to see more people smoking cigarettes when I go to more rural and poor areas, even though it's so expensive. The yellow, which is watch television more than 3 hours a day, which we don't see until like 99. They start having data for that. And I remember as a kid, that was something they were always worried about is, oh, how much television are you watching? Now that's been replaced with other things, as we'll see. But a little bit more than 50% of freshmen were doing that, and that has dropped now. I think now and you'll see it's been replaced by other stuff. Uh, Ever had sexual intercourse, the red line? A little below 40% in the 90s, stayed pretty consistent, and it has taken a drop the last, 5 plus years. And one of the reasons why, at least it's thought why, some research I've read, is because so many people are spending time online. Teenagers spend so much time online and on social media. That's the relationships now, where the physical activity, seeing people in person, has dropped a lot. Where back in the day, you didn't have social media, so you would get together with people. Now people don't get together as much as they once did. So that's one of the reasons why, you know, sexual intercourse among teenagers has dropped. The green line, ever used marijuana. So we can see weed use in the 90s started going way up, and then it dipped again, started going up in 2000, 10, 11, and it's another dip. It'll be interesting to see where that will be at in the future now that it's legal in most states. But of course, I believe you have to be 21 to purchase it though. And lastly, and this is the only one that's actually gone up in the last 5 to 10 years, is video game or computer use for more than 3 hours a day. All right, so that we didn't start keeping track of that till 2003, and you've seen that has gone up sharply. Right, so like I said, that has replaced other stuff like watching TV and things like that. As teenagers spend most of their time online, whether it's playing games, on social media, talking to people, just watching videos. That is where teenagers spend a lot of their time nowadays. All right, so let's talk about Stormy Stressful Stanley, right? That's G. Stanley Hall. He's the one that came up with the term storm and stress with reference to teenagers. So he found that, there's three main characteristics that can identify most teenagers, right? So of course it's generalization. So he said conflict with parents, mood and hormonal, and risky behavior. So it makes sense. A lot of times teenagers butt heads with their parents because they're almost an adult, so they want to be treated like an adult, but the parents still have authority over them. And teenagers are, mood and hormonal, which causes conflicts with a lot of people they're around. And of course, that risky behavior we talked about in the beginning with the indestructibility cortex part of the brain, that they tend to do things that are a little riskier, whether that's drive 100 miles an hour in a car or whether it's unprotected sex, right? All those are risky behaviors. Physical development. Puberty, vocab word, make sure you know, is a time when we mature sexually. So make sure you know that this is the physical mark of adolescence, right? Puberty is a physical mark of adolescence. Menarche, another vocab word, is the first menstrual period. So it's when women get their first menstrual cycle. Spermarchy, which is in your book, that's the male's first ejaculation. And then lastly, there's nocturnal emissions. If you don't know what that is, you might be more familiar with the term wet dream. And that is another physical mark of puberty, and which is the physical mark of adolescence. So to continue with physical development, during puberty and adolescence, you developed primary and secondary sex characteristics. So primary sex characteristics are where your reproductive organs and external genitalia develop. So pretty much you can reproduce, right? You can have babies after you've reached puberty because those things have developed. Your secondary sex characteristics also develop during puberty, but these are non-reproductive organs. So these develop with puberty, but you don't necessarily need them for reproduction. They have babies. So like for women, they develop breasts and hips. For men, facial hair develops and their voice becomes deeper. Cognitive development. Remember Jean Piaget that we talked about? Formal operations is that the last, a fourth of his cognitive development stages. From 12 on, you should be in this formal operational stage because you can, you have the ability to think about the unseen. You can approach problems systematically. You can think logically, right? You can, you have that abstract thinking. Imaginary audience, vocab word, make sure you know. This is common during adolescence. I was talking about this earlier a little bit. This is what I was hinting at. This is when people believe that they're constantly being scrutinized wherever they are, right? Every little blemish will be noticed. So imaginary audience is when you think everyone's always looking at you and judging you. So let's say like maybe you spilled a tiny little speck on your shirt, or you have a pimple and you're afraid to go in class because everyone's just going to be staring at you. In reality, people could care less, right? But when you're a teenager, you have that imaginary audience where you think everyone is staring at you and everyone cares what's happening. Another important vocab word to know is personal fable. So the definition is over-differentiating of one's experiences and feelings from others to the point of assuming those experiences are unique from those of others. So that's, kind of a wordy, maybe difficult definitions, but if you know the examples, you can understand personal fable. So a personal fable is where you say, oh, nobody understands me. You just don't know how it feels. Maybe you've said that before, or you heard other people say that before. Like that's personal fable is where like you feel your experiences are so unique to everyone else, no one could possibly know what you're going through, right? But whether it's a breakup or something bad happened to you, it's happened to other people before. Your parents, your teachers, they've gone through breakups before. They've had to deal with bad stuff, so they might know what you feel like, but yet you feel like no one could possibly understand that, right? That is a personal fable. So moral development. If you remember Kohlberg's stages of moral development, uh, most teenagers, adolescents find themselves in the conventional stage, right? Whether it's early stage 3, late stage 4. And that's you do things because the rules and the laws tell you to do it, right? So look at that speed limit sign there. If there was no speed limit sign, would you still drive that? No, you just want to avoid getting a ticket probably. If you didn't have that, you'd probably drive as fast as you could. So remember, conventional is just doing things because the rules and laws tell you to. Social development. So remember Erik Erikson and his 8 stages of psychosocial development. Well, adolescents, they fall in the identity versus role confusion stage, right? Identity, you know who you are. Role confusion is you're trying to figure out who you are. And if you don't know who you are as a teenager, there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's the whole purpose of adolescence is to figure out who you are. And as we said at the beginning, adolescence is becoming, longer. So it's taking people longer and longer to figure out who they are. So most people in high school don't know who they are. A lot of people don't figure out till college, or a lot of people until after college, right? So that's why you still have these mid 20s living with their parents. They're still trying to figure out who they are and what they want to do with their life. All right, the last slide is also social development. This is James Marcia's theory, and he just focuses on social development within adolescence. And what he does, he suggests identity can be seen in terms of which 2 characteristics, either crisis, sloppy, or commitment, is either present or absent. So it's all based off crisis or commitment and whether you have it or you don't have it. So his 4 stages are identity diffusion, which is adolescent does not have a sense of having choices. He or she has not yet made a commitment. Identity foreclosure, which adolescent seems willing to commit to some relevant roles, values, or goals for the future, tends to conform to the expectations of others regarding their future. Identity moratorium, which adolescent is currently in exploring various commitments and is ready to make choices, but has not made a commitment. Identity achievement, adolescent has gone through an identity crisis and has made a commitment to a sense of identity that he or she has chosen. So because they all start with identity, a lot of students get these confused, so make sure you focus on these couple metaphors to maybe help understand them. One I've heard is like a captain in a ship. So like identity diffusion, he's not the captain, he's not on his own ship, he hasn't made any commitments yet. Identity foreclosure, he's on a ship, he's not the captain of it, he's willing to go wherever, the captain wants to take him. Identity moratorium is, you're on a ship, you're still anchored though, you're on your own ship, you're still anchored, and you have like 3 choices. You haven't made a decision where you want to go yet. You go to Jamaica, Bahamas, or the Virgin Islands. You don't know which one you want to go to, but you're trying to make that decision, but you've narrowed it down. Where identity achievement is, you're the captain of your own ship, and you're on your way, you're sailing off to Jamaica. All right, so that's one metaphor to think about. I like to think about it as going off to college, right? Identity diffusion, you got no idea where you want to go, right? You haven't made a commitment to even going to college yet. Identity foreclosure, you're willing to make a commitment, but you just conform to what other people want. So your parents want you to be a doctor, and they want you to go to the University of Chicago. So you're like, oh, sure, I'll go be a doctor at the University of Chicago. Identity moratorium is, you're exploring your options, so you've narrowed it down to like your top 3 colleges. Not sure where you're going to go yet, but you've narrowed all the other ones down. I don't want to do this, and I don't want to go there. And identity achievement is, you've made a commitment, right? You signed your letter of intent. You're going to go to this school, and you're going to be a doctor, or you're going to be a teacher, whatever it is. Identity achievement is where, you've made the decision, you've made that commitment, right? So it's all about crisis and commitment, whether you have it or whether you don't have it.